Welcome to Rehash, a Web3 podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rehash. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and in this episode we are talking all about women in Web3, onboarding new people to Web3, DAOs, community building, and so much more with Deana Burke and Natasha Hoskins, co-founders of Boys Club and co-hosts of the Boys Club podcast. Welcome, Deana and Natasha. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
For having us. This is so fun.
And I actually should apologize because I have listened to your podcast and it's just called Boys Club, not the Boys Club podcast that's literally in the intro. And I called it the Boys Club podcast.
Here's the thing. Do it all the time.
It's sticking as the Boys Club podcast. I feel like, if that's the will of the podcast, then that's what it might become.
That's the way.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we dive into Boys Club and all things DAOs and community building and all that good stuff, for anybody who isn't familiar with your background, can you both just give a brief introduction about who you are, what your background is, what you were doing before you got into the wonderful world of Web3?
Yeah. So I've been in early stage startups all my career thus far. So worked at where Deana and I met, actually a crowdfunding platform called Indiegogo. Was there working with entrepreneurs, sort of found that working with entrepreneurs all day long, I realized, actually that's the job I want, not the job I have. So left there and started a travel startup, totally different than crypto. Did that for a few years, and Deana joined as co-founder during that process as well. So that was really a marketplace for curated itineraries. Did that, launched it in March 2020. So A+ timing with the pandemic. So going into a crypto bear market, I'm like, this feels sort of similar. But I did that, and then that business actually got acquired by a company called Fora, where I'm at now, along with Boys Club. And Fora is sort of rebranding and retooling the travel agent. So that's sort of my background, early stage, really love sort of the experimental, throwing things at the wall part of a business. And then Deana and I have been obviously working on Boys Club since November. So that's a bit about my background.
Natasha isn't a full-time Web3 degen like the rest of us.
I'm not.
She lives her Web2 lifestyle during the day, and she hangs out with us Web3 folks at night.
Yeah, I got a foot in both worlds, and it works out pretty well for me.
It's probably a good thing.
She's mitigating risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what about you, Deana?
Yeah, so I started my career in marketing agencies and worked at agencies. I started an agency with a colleague of mine. We ran that together for a few years, and then that agency was acquired by Indiegogo. So that's when I went over there. Shout out Indiegogo. That's where Natasha and I met. And then I was, at the time, it's 2017. So that was when, obviously the last bull run, that I was attracted to crypto. And I was attracted primarily initially for the money. So just want to come clean on that. Just want to get it all out there. It's not how I am today, but it was how I started. And yeah, I just got, once I sort of was starting to understand the technology behind it, I just got really excited about what I felt like blockchain, crypto as it was then, now we're Web3, but what that could do for things that I cared about, like financial inclusion and also creating wealth generating opportunities for people who had sort of been left behind by the traditional financial system. So I got really into it. I left Indiegogo and I raised some money and built a startup that was basically, it was functionally a Bitcoin wallet, but it was designed very intentionally for teenage girls, sort of to give them a safe, well-lit place to experiment and sort of be exposed to this world. Had some education stuff that was built into it. And I launched that in 2018, crypto winter, deep crypto winter, couldn't get anyone to care about that. And we couldn't find any meaningful traction, and it's fine. It's all part of the journey. But that just to say that I've really been trying for a while to figure out ways, creative ways to help make this space more accessible for people who maybe aren't in tech or finance. And so when Natasha and I were winding down the travel startup, which was being acquired, we were that was in sort of September, October, November of this past year. And we were looking around and just seeing a lot of sort of Web3 now, it's Web3, had sort of seeped into culture in really interesting ways, and had a lot of women in our lives sort of wondering what their role was for them and what the opportunity was for them. And so that's when we started Boys Club. And also during the day, I work at the Cello Foundation. So Cello's carbon negative layer 1, and I'm head of marketing there. So I'm full-time Web3 degen during the day and at night with Cello and Boys Club. But yeah, that's my journey.
Wow. Okay. So I knew you guys were business partners before, but I didn't know it was a travel agency or any of the details around that. I actually was a travel blogger for a few years before I got into Web3. So we need to talk more about that.
Yeah, we got lots to.
I have a travel blog with my sister, and we've definitely thrown around the idea of doing something more with it, like whether it's probably not like a travel agency, but yeah.
Natasha's in sales mode.
I'm not familiar with Fora. I have to check it out. Is it just Fora?
Yeah, fortravel.com. Shilling.
Okay, cool.
I'm shilling.
Hot plug.
I know. This is
I'm sorry. I have to.
You totally have to. It's totally appropriate.
Okay, so Deana, at some point between getting into crypto because you wanted to get rich and realizing what it was actually about and wanting to help people, a shift happened.
Yeah.
So when did that shift happen? How did it happen? And what was it, what happened that made you hyper aware that this onboarding problem was a big problem, and especially for women?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the moment that it sort of moved, it shifted for me from money and sort of getting rich personally, and what the technology meant it was really, I think, when I learned about the Roya Mahboob project in Afghanistan, when I believe she still does it, where she had set up sort of a company that was doing, I think, some writing work, and she was employing Afghani women. And they couldn't and can't, is my understanding, open a bank account. And so she was having trouble figuring out ways to pay them. I don't know if you're familiar with the story or not yet.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah,
it was a few years ago, right?
It was, yeah. It was quite a long time ago. But she basically backed into Bitcoin as a solution to that very specific problem. She set them all up with Bitcoin wallets, and she started compensating them in Bitcoin, really sort of as a way to skirt that cultural no-go zone around women having their own bank accounts. What it sort of meant when she started paying them in Bitcoin was that for the first time, these women actually had autonomy over their money in a really powerful and meaningful way. And that was sort of when I think it sort of clicked for me that I was oh, okay, we're working outside of the boundaries here in a way that can be really powerful for people who haven't been served by the boundaries that have been set by the traditional financial system. So that was sort of an unlock for me personally. But I will say that in 2017 and 2018, I was very much on my journey alone. I would go to crypto conferences by myself. I didn't feel the communities that I was interested in being in service of were represented at those crypto conferences. I was there total fish out of water, being I'm not sure what this is, but I'm interested in it, so I'm going to sort of stay here. But it felt very much not a place that I think a lot of people would feel was for them. And so, and it really wasn't until this past year with the sort of, this bull run, when crypto, now Web3, sort of moved from being in this black box of technology and finance, and it being sort of interesting to people who were interested in those two things or interested in the intersection of those two things, to sort of seeping into art and sports and music and entertainment and culture. And that was, so in my relationship with Natasha, I had always been crypto, gotta come with me to these things. And she was always I don't know. No, thanks. Thank you, but no, thank you. And then this past year, there was really a change in that. And there was a change in sort of the zeitgeist of how Web3 was being talked about. And so I think that was when we were man, we need to figure out a way to make this a friendlier place for women, if they're curious about it, to learn more.
Yeah, so I'm curious, Natasha, from your perspective as the person with the crazy crypto friend, what made your perspective shift with regards to at first being reluctant to go to these events with her, and over time, eventually being okay, this seems okay, maybe I'll go check it out.
Yeah, I mean, Deana said it really really well. But that was definitely the dynamic in our relationship, both in our working relationship and our friendship. Like Deana's always like, maybe there's some things that with our previous startup, like we can do with like the blockchain. And I was just like, no, it's weird. Like, stop talking about this. And I'd just be like, and yeah, she'd pull me along to stuff. And I was just like, this is really cool for you. And like, I'm excited for the opportunity that it presents for you, but like, it's not for me. And she was like, no, there's so much opportunity. There's so much happening here. That's not just about, like DeFi products or something, or protocols or something like that. So basically, like, I've told this story many times, but we went on this trip to Las Vegas, and that summer, this was like in September, and really that summer I had started to hear about NFTs and DAOs and social clubs, and it was really like touching my world in a way that it truly had not ever before. And I was like hearing my husband talk about like Top Shop and like all this stuff that I was like, are we still like talking about the thing that Deana's been like nonstop, like beating me over the head with? Like, how's this happening? And so I started to just like, my interest was piqued. I had a conversation with a friend about friends with benefits. And that was like, sort of like, oh, this is interesting. This is starting to rub up against stuff I am interested in. And like, how also taking like what was happening in crypto into like actual connection with other people. Like, that was always sort of the blocker for me, is I'm like, I'm not really interested in like the metaverse. Like, I'm not really sure what that presents for me. But hearing about friends with benefits and thinking about like, oh, wow, you're expanding your network, you're having deeper connections with people, like what that makes possible is really interesting. So anyway, we went on this Vegas trip and I was like, okay, you have 3 hours. We're sitting by the pool. Let's go. Like, sell me. And so she did. Like, we pulled up like decks on, DAOs, and went through like different Discords, and like showed me like crypto Twitter for the first time, like really going through this whole world. And it was just a real unlock for me around the opportunity, like how expansive the opportunity was. And for the first time, really understanding, okay, what's happening here is an enabling technology. It's not, just about one thing. It's about how you can sort of apply the technology that's happening and the innovation that's happening in this space to your own personal interests, the things that you care about. And that only happened for me in a social moment where I was able to sit down with somebody that I trusted, that I knew had like my best interest in mind, like just really a lot of trust, and also like a lot of fun. Like, we had a great time like talking about these things. But in the same sort of moment and in conversation, like everything she showed me was so like dude centric. Like, it was just like so bro-y, just like not attractive to me, and the exact opposite of sort of the safe place that I felt like in that conversation with Deana. So that's sort of like my journey into the space, and then really feeling like there was a safety in our friendship as I started to do my own journey to ask her questions and to like get into it more with somebody that I knew had my best interest in mind.
Yeah, that's so cool. Hats off to you, Deana. That's super impressive.
Yeah, big time.
Somebody was
No,
like,
it
okay,
took
you've got
me years.
3 hours. You've got 3 hours to sell me on this thing. This is your one shot. Don't mess it up.
I was
like,
soft
oh my God.
pitching for many years. I had been really laying the foundations for that moment. So I just want to make that clear. I didn't really sell her in three hours. I sold her in 3 years.
That's fair. So that's super nice for you, Natasha. Like, that it seems like a very pleasant onboarding experience. You already had a really good friend who was in it. Like, that's the ideal way to be onboarded. But for a lot of people, like yourself, Deana, like, you didn't really have that support system when you onboarded, so it was a lot rougher. In your mind, because Boys Club now is your main goal is to onboard women to Web3, what does that ideal onboarding process look like? And like, what is this like this system or process that you're trying to provide for your members?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that transparently, we're still trying to figure it out. I think that one sort of place that we've come to is that onboarding feels very sort of technical and clinical, and actually not a great representation of what we want to be doing. Because like that sort of like signals that you're like making decisions for people on their behalf for what wallets they should use and things like, and that's sort of a space that I'm not personally very comfortable like getting my full weight behind like a protocol or a product or something like that. How we're instead framing it is like we're welcoming women to Web3 and creating a space where hopefully they can see other women and other non-binary people. And honestly, our community, first of all, is open to anyone. We just center female non-binary voices. And like, that's basically sort of how we're approaching gender. But like, that's sort of the type of person that we attract as a result. But really sort of thinking about it instead as like, okay, someone has like a tiny little spark of interest in the space or curiosity in the space, right? Like maybe they saw a news article or maybe they hear their friends talking about it, like just a tiny little nugget. And our hope at Boys Club is that like we can sort of nurture that, right? And we can help them like through really being in community with other people who are sort of sharing and exploring around the same things and have the same interests, and like showcasing people like Evan McMullen who are like just crazy leaders in the space and are like paving new paths for like in this industry, and like using them as like inspiration to be like show what's possible in this realm. And then like as people have questions, like Natasha, like we're sort of like any question is great. So like ask anything, and like this is a safe place to do that. And so it's more about us like just sort of having a friendly place for people to land and to sort of find themselves versus, okay, we're going to do this with this wallet. We're going to do this with this staking here. Like, you know, we do have some of that as like content if people are interested, but it's not really the main focus of like where we think the value is for people coming into this space.
Yeah, I think that's the best way, honestly. And I think that's like one of the biggest mistakes people make with trying to onboard people to Web3 is they just tell their narrative of like they just like give their pitch. And I always say like you have to like understand where the other person is coming from first. Or like what their background is and what's going to be interesting to them, what they care about. Because like if they like, for me, like I don't come from a background in finance or anything. So if you try to sell me on DeFi straight away and like yield farming and stuff, I'd be like, what is this? Is this English?
Yeah, I feel like that's been a big learning for us, and actually I think came out of Deana and my relationship as well. Is like I studied art history. I was still sort of am and really into the arts, and like so that was sort of the assumption of what would get me into it. Like NFTs are going to be like your gateway, and it just like did not work for me. I was like, well, this is not that interesting. But DAOs like really unlocked something for me, and like really sparked this interest in what was possible around new structures of ownership and power and distribution of wealth creation. Like those things were so just like mind-bending to me and got me totally into space. And I think you can't, and we've seen that in Boys Club too, you have an assumption around like, oh, this woman's really into fashion, or they're really into finance or whatever, they're investors, like, and you think that that's going to be their way in, but oftentimes I've found more than not, it's actually pretty surprising, the thing that like is the unlock moment for them. So I think for us, we're really sensitive to being really prescriptive about like what the steps are that you take, and instead really providing like a community and an open door for people to come in and explore as well lit of a space as they can, with support of other people who want to see them through that journey of exploration.
I think another thing just to add to that is that like so much of how you like learn in this space is by doing. Like, and it's still like yesterday, I like it happens to me every single day. Like yesterday I was like dealing with some nonce issue and Gnosis multisig, and the only way that I could figure out a way through it was like literally doing it myself and like looking up the whatever it was. And so I think that like because it's so much about learning by doing, like, and you can't fake someone's like effort and enthusiasm in the space. Like you can't force someone to like care, right? Like they just have to care in the first place. And then if they care, they'll figure out a way to like make the nonce transaction work, right? Or they'll figure out a way to like set up their MetaMask wallet for the first time. Like that sort of curiosity and caring is going to be what overcomes the friction of onboarding in the space, which is so high, right? Like it's so high. And so I think for us, we're like, how do we just like support the caring and the curiosity? And how we do that is by like giving people a really wide view of what's possible in this world and like what's happening and the leaders and the people that are like doing really, really interesting things versus being like, here are the steps you take to do XYZ, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a very community first mindset and just very like very welcoming and open and non-intimidating, like a safe space for people to ask anything.
Yeah.
And so that's okay. That's awesome. Like that's once people land in boys club, that's the process. That's awesome. But how do you get people to like land in boys club in the first place? And you guys have done such a good job of it. You built such a strong, like not just a big community, but I feel like a very like passionate and loyal community of people as well. Like what is the secret to that?
That's a great question. I mean, yeah, the boys, they come out strong. They're fierce about it. I think one of the benefits of coming into this space, I mean, I know we're all still so early, but late in my experience was like, I am sort of like a go-to-market brand person. Like that's been a part of my career previously. And so we really approached Boys Club with like a brand first thinking. Like how does everything look and feel consistent? How do we speak to a certain type of person with the things that we're talking about? And that was the intention from the beginning. Like everything that we are producing, every piece of content that we're putting out, like there has to be a continuity to it. And I think at least my experience so far of Web3 has been that is not the case with most stuff in this space. Like, it's a lot of sort of protocol and dev first thinking, which provides a lot of innovation, technological innovation, but doesn't have a lot of brand thinking around it. So I think that's like part of the key to the success that maybe we've had in growing our community and growing our reach is that you see something and like, you're like, oh yeah, that's Boys Club. And like, there's something about that really helps it sort of like be pervasive in the way that it finds its like little nooks and crannies in other spaces. I don't know, Deana, if you have more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like we pay a lot of attention to brand. We pay a lot of attention to voice. We try and figure out ways to make analogies or tie it back to things in pop culture or the lives of people that we know are in our community that we'll care about. And I think the biggest thing, our biggest sort of advantage and the thing that makes us different from a lot of other groups in Web3 and is we're very like humor and fun focused. Like we keep it, that's pretty much like a top value for us, which is like, how do we keep this fun and funny and like use that as, and that's like our personality. And so I think that like has worked really hard in like attracting someone who was sort of looking around the space previously and been like, oh man, all this stuff feels sort of dry and feels like serious. And like, if I'm like doing like researching this on like my nights and weekends, like I'm not going to like, it's just a lot more fun to do it in a space that like has that type of energy to it. So we've been really deliberate about that. And also like, and I would encourage this for other communities as well. Like we've been very intentional about doing a lot of experiments. So we were like, oh, let's just try a newsletter. I don't know like what a newsletter is going to be. And now it's like one of the most important channels for us to communicate with the community. Like the Discord's there and it's great, but like that doesn't give reach and nor should it, right? Because if you have a Discord with hundreds of thousands of people, like it's useless. So we've sort of, in terms of how we define like community versus audience, community is like, it's pretty intimate. Like it's our Discord and it's people who have sort of applied and have joined and like understand the context for Boys Club and are maybe interested in participating in the DAO and like participating in sort of governance and all these things and being a contributor to the DAO versus audience, which is this sort of top of funnel that you're referencing, which is like some of these experiments that we're running on newsletter or on podcast. And I mean, you get this, you're doing it, but I think that like just sort of like willingness to experiment and like just ship stuff has worked out for us well so far. Now, that said, the flip side of that is that we're all totally underwater with like all the stuff to do all the time. You know what I mean? Like we've now have a podcast and a weekly newsletter and we, all these other things that we're doing, but I don't know when it sort of feels like worth pursuing, even though we're all like dead because it's sort of working. So
one thing I'll add, and this is, I mean, sort of marketing 101, but for people who are interested is like, we're very channel specific. So we know what is going to be right for the newsletter. We're thoughtful about what's a right thing to put in Discord. And like Twitter is like super different, obviously, than like the type of thing that you're talking about on Instagram. And like, I think that there's like first principles of marketing, I think are sort of lost in Web3. And just coming at it with that perspective, I think has been really useful for us.
Yeah, 100%. I think like Web3 up to this point has still been very like finance bro and dev heavy, right? So
Yeah.
marketing probably isn't like one of the top skill sets that a lot of people in the space have. But yeah, back to your point about like creating content that's fun and funny and uses analogies back to pop culture and things that everybody can relate to. One of my favorite pieces of content you guys have made is that TikTok video comparing the different blockchains to the Sex and the City characters. I thought that was hilarious. And that was like honestly one of my favorite pieces of content.
We have a lot of fun. We did one like with different coins and Reformation looks, which was great.
That one, yeah, maybe we should revitalize that one.
Yeah, that was a
sort of
solid.
early days.
Is that on
Honestly,
TikTok
probably go
too?
back to
I haven't seen it.
Yeah,
maybe
we'll send it. We'll
refresh
send it
that
through.
Okay. I'll go check it out.
Yeah, we very much have like a ship it attitude where we're just like, I don't know, this feels sort of insane, but like, let's just get it out there and see.
I love that stuff. Like the stuff that you're like, this is so far out in left field. Like I have no idea if this will land at all. Like that's like my favorite type of thing. So
also like the type of stuff that we're like, man, this is going to appeal to like 3 people. Like we go in and we're like, this is so niche. Like the skincare crypt Web3 crossover. We're like, we were creating it. And we're like, man, I don't know how many people are going to be like the gua sha stone and the like pull together logo. But like, it's surprising how many people that lands for. And when they feel seen in such a niche way, they really feel seen. Right. And I think that that's been like, part of the sort of special sauce for Boys Club is like really not being afraid to like go super niche and really like weirdly targeted. And then like, 1 out of every 3 times that will work out in a big way.
I think another cool thing about that too is that it's unexpected. Like most people consuming crypto content expect a certain thing. And so when that comes around, even if I don't know that much about skincare or what the specific skincare thing you're talking about, I'm just like it's the shock factor makes me want to pay attention and like
dive into I love that. I love the shock factor.
For sure. Okay, so I want to talk about the DAO part of Boys Club. So you guys started Boys Club as just like a social club, and then I think over time you transitioned into a DAO. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I would love to hear about what that process has been like. Like, why did you decide that Boys Club should be a DAO instead of just however it was structured before? And like, what difference has that made transitioning into a DAO?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to the initial thinking. I mean, I think when we first started Boys Club, it was really like Deana and I had both worked on startups that were very difficult timing-wise, like bear market and COVID and stuff like that. And like we both had done the thing where we were like, we have an idea. We're really excited about this idea. We're going to go raise money and then we're going to build that and then we're going to put it out into the world and we're going to make people like it. And that did not work that well for either of us. And really had like a lot of learnings as like entrepreneurs around, oh, wow, like we really should have like listened to the people that we wanted to build things for before we like put them out in the world and did all this work to create these products. And so when we were talking about Boys Club, we were very much like, very, community first. Like, let's get some people in a room. Let's do some events. Let's start talking to people and like, let's see what they want out of this. Like, what is something that's going to meet their needs, help them get into this space? Like, what does that look like? So there was like a thinking in those initial conversations, like maybe this is a DAO. Like that was like, again, sort of where my interest got piqued initially in this space. And I think we were thinking a lot about shared ownership. And so that was like there, like it wasn't like totally absent from the conversation, but with this thinking of, we're really going to listen to our community. We're going to build up a community here. And then we're going to see if that is something we should do and something that they're interested in and want to build together. So that was sort of how it started. And then Deana, I think if you want to take it sort of from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like as Natasha's saying, this idea of like shared ownership and upside was there from the very beginning. Like we were sort of, especially I think as we were looking at like friends with benefits as a model, just being really compelled by what that flywheel looks like for a community that is all incentivized and is sort of in the same, where the incentives are aligned in really interesting ways versus like a Soho House or whatever, or one of those others where it sort of is more extractive. And I think that was sort of always there for us, but it wasn't until recently when we were like, man, we don't want to just talk about this technology. We don't want to just like talk about what Web3 can do for people or for women, or like, and we don't want to just like talk about MetaMask and these things. Like, we want to really use it to create like a big organization, like and to generate wealth ideally for us and our community. And like we sort of want to like, yeah, like just really truly see the opportunity in what it means to have like an incentive aligned community. Like, what does that mean for a Web3 native media brand, right? Like, sort of is pretty interesting. Like, what does it mean for like a Web3 native product studio when you have all these people together who are incentivized to work together and solve interesting problems and do that in like a community that's also potentially a launch pad as well. And that launch pad has aligned incentives too. So like we sort of were, it just took us a little bit more time to like sort of get around to like building the infrastructure of it. It was always there, but now we're very intentionally moving in the direction of like, how do we use this DAO to build something really powerful that I think like instead of just like, yeah, just sort of like talking about the technology, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And so I'm curious, like, what does that incentive alignment look like for Boys Club members specifically? And like, what is the upside that members share in by being part of the DAO?
Yeah. So right now we have, shout out to Parker and Amy, who have put together sort of season 1 of our DAO, which is we're doing a minimum, we're taking a minimum viable community approach. So we're going to be basically like deploying the DAO amongst the contributors to Boys Club first to sort of test and learn and see what processes work, what don't, if we can hit some interesting KPIs that make it feel like it's going to work for a larger community. So we're rolling it out first to like, I think it's 30, 40 odd people versus 2,000 in the Discord to sort of test some of our assumptions around it, right? And like see like how to do it in a more lower stakes way. And when
you say rolling it out, it's primarily around governance and voting. So that's the primary like function of that initial season 1 of our MVC is getting a voting mechanism in front of our contributors and having, as Deana said, some KPIs around engagement and things like that to make sure that our approach is right.
But ultimately, like the vision is a token. I don't know exactly which type, when, where that happens, but that as like sort of the seamless way to distribute and like manage the value of Boys Club moving forward.
You guys launched a couple of NFT projects, right? I think one to the community and one to the public. Would you think about using those as like token gating governance within Boys Club?
Yeah, we have thought a lot about, so the NFT was also just like in the spirit of experimentation, right? We're like, man, we just want to like see what it's like to launch an NFT project. Like none of us had ever done it. And we had some developers and product people and designers in the group who sort of wanted to experiment with us in this context. And we're like, all right, let's just like see and ship it and like see how it works. By the way, I'm so glad we did that because we've learned so much. And and I think also like for the people individually who are working on that project, like for their own personal like careers and personal development, like learned, like we all just learned so much along the way. And so really glad to have done that. But I think as we were designing the NFT project, we were really sensitive not to create something that felt extractive to the community. Like it didn't feel right to like charge Boys Club people in the Discord, charge them for an NFT and then gate the access to the NFT. Like we're really like first principles for us is like, how do we create value versus extract value? And so,
and the other thing was like having a token gated community doesn't make sense when your community is about learning and onboarding. Like there's so many assumptions you have about like, you have to have a wallet. You have to understand how to mint an NFT and how to find in your OpenSea. Like there's so many assumptions that it didn't make sense. Like the more we talked about it to approach it that way. So we knew from the beginning, okay, we're not going to at this point or like NFT Gate, our Discord. And then the other thing that Deana is speaking to is like always having the perspective of how are we adding value, not extracting value from our community. And so thinking about this project, like that was sort of a main premise that launched the approach of 2 different NFTs.
Yeah. And I think that like we were interested in creating a revenue generating moment. And so that's why we did the Zaddies. But we also like didn't want that to be tied to any sort of expectations that like that gets you into the community or doesn't, or like you need to have the NFT to be in or not. Like it does make sense for a lot of other communities, token gating or NFT gating. And maybe in the future, there'll be like, we're talking with Disco and Evan about like, what does it mean to have like a boys club credential? And maybe if you're a holder of main character and Zaddy, like that unlocks something in the future. I can totally see that being the case. But for right now, we just really want to like, yeah, as Natasha said, like if we're about accessibility, like we really need to have that as like our sort of North Star when we're thinking about how we design the way the community comes together.
And for the listener that was not familiar with our NFT project, so there were 2 NFTs. The first one was called a Zaddy, and that was really for supporters, like for dudes that love Boys Club that like want to have that a representation in their wallet around supporting what we're doing and being aligned with our mission and other like brands and protocols, and a lot of great people jumped on board for that. And so that was the first one. And then the second one was really just like a gift to our community. It was called Main Character. And that was for sort of the first participants of our community. And again, just like a representation that they're early, that they were a part of this from really the get. And those were the 2 NFTs. And the main character was free. And then the Zaddy that was minted. So yeah, that was how the project came together.
I love it. Yeah, that makes total sense. I think I heard a podcast episode with you guys where I forget which one of you was talking about how you think about governance in DAOs and how you think that there should be more of like a leadership that decides certain things and then open governance. Was it, do you know what I'm talking about? You're allowed.
No, but I know who said it. I mean, I know that here's the thing.
You're doxing me. You're doxing me right now.
You're totally doxed. So I think that like there's a nerve here that you're sort of. I mean, it's fine.
Not really.
Sorry,
but
I
not
really started with trigger warning.
Yeah. I guess the trigger warning is more for sort of like the DAO purists in the room.
Yeah. One, I'm so excited about this space because the rules are not written. So then when people are like, this is how you do a DAO, I'm like, nobody knows how to do a DAO. Like nobody. So like that's part of it is just a knee-jerk reaction to being like, the rules are not written in this space. We get to decide like what this looks like, what this feels like, how we have governance, how we structure this, and wanting to always have sort of a pushback around that because that's what's exciting about it. Like all of this is being designed now, and I want to be a part of what that design process looks like. So that's one note. The second note is just like on the worst day, a DAO can feel like a group project in high school where you're just like, okay, like 2 people are doing the work and everybody else is just kind of sitting here. And like, and that has not been my experience at Boys Club, but I have a real sensitivity to like, that can happen. And that is really frustrating. And you'll lose good people along the way because that's just like not going to work. And like wanting to make sure that we're intentionally designing for a type of collaboration that actually makes sense. And in a lot of my work, I've seen that there's usually somebody, a guiding principle, like, and I'm not saying just me, I'm saying there's leaders within our community that I think are incredibly bright and brilliant and have like that sort of just gumption to like drive something. And I don't want to over-engineer a process where someone can't just like run in their lane when they have a lot of excitement and inspiration to do that. So I think we're figuring it out. And like, I think there's ways to have collaboration and shared governance and all this sort of stuff, but also be able to move quickly and nimbly and have people who have an idea and want to run with it with sort of being true to what that idea was and making sure that that's still possible within a DAO structure. So that's my thinking at the moment.
I think, yeah. And also like subject to change, right?
Subject to change, open to change.
We're all learning and evolving beings. I think that like, for me, the DAO policing is really funny because it's not like there's like the LLC police, right? Like ultimately that's what this is. It's just a way to coordinate a group of people together. And it's, I think, a 10x better way to coordinate people than an LLC or a C Corp because of all the various reasons that we all know. But like, that's what this is. It's just like some foundational infrastructure. And so people sort of imbuing it with like all these other things feels sometimes silly at times, because I'm like, man, we're like you're sort of like missing the point of it a little bit, where I don't know, that's probably going to piss a lot of people off, but that's sort of how I think about it. Yeah.
I am honestly on the same page as you guys. Like DAOs essentially are just LLCs or companies, a different type of organization, which is a company is the type of organization. And so when people are like, DAOs should this and DAOs should that, it's like, you wouldn't say like all companies should this, all companies should that. So it also doesn't make sense to say that about DAOs. But and I have plenty of tweets that say DAOs should this and DAOs should that. So I'm tweeting
I mean,
myself.
we're all guilty. We're all guilty. But I think that that's sort of the general vibe.
Yeah, I agree with that. So sort of wrapping up this convo on Boys Club, looking back on the last however, like 9 months or however long it's been since Boys Club came to be, what is a rose, a thorn, and a bud for you guys? Do you guys know what this is? Like a high point,
I do, yeah.
Remind me what
a high,
bud is
a low.
again.
Bud is like something that you're looking forward to.
Okay.
Like something that's emerging.
Yeah.
Oh, I got mine.
Oh.
Go
Should I go first?
Jump in.
Yeah.
Jump on in.
Oh, well, I got
LFG,
my bud. Okay. Rose has been like genuine friendships from Boys Club. Like I look around our core team and I'm like, these are some of my best friends, like that I've met since November, and like genuinely like love them and want to hang out with them and are happy to see them. And so that has been a very unexpected and just like totally delightful outcome of starting Boys Club. And then Thorn has definitely been what we just talked about. I am super type A and really have a way I like to do things, and DAOs inherently are just chaos of like contribution and collaboration and things launching and things, and like feeling really having like a tension between how do we keep what we talked about earlier, like a consistent brand and feel and value of Boys Club, with also letting people contribute and launch things out of this sort of the launchpad that is Boys Club. And then Bud, we're working on a zine right now for Boys Club, like really looking at how to expand sort of this media empire into other channels and other mediums. And I'm really excited about the work that's happening there with Noah, who is a part of our community, really leading the charge there. So really excited about how that all comes together and the work that's ahead of us with that.
That's super exciting. I can't wait to see it. Do you guys have a launch date for the zine yet?
Oh, that is the question.
No,
Sometime this fall.
Yeah, fall.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
It's our summer project.
What about you, Deana?
Okay, I think that a thorn, I'll start with the negative. That has been fully our own making. Like we made our bed in this way, but being sort of cornered into a conversation about women, and that being sort of the way that people think about us, obviously, because that's the way we talk about ourselves. But I think that like that feels limiting, especially as we're thinking about like how do we turn Boys Club into something that, like a big business. And so, I think that would be the thorn, is sort of just being sort of cornered into that conversation, because it keeps us very niche, and I don't think like properly appreciates the opportunity like of the thing that we're building. I think that a rose has been, I know for a fact that Boys Club has created introductions and facilitated like jobs in a way that like, I think there's like 20 or 25 women who have found like amazing higher paying jobs, like as a result of being in Boys Club. And that to me feels like really, really special, and something that like I get a huge amount of fulfillment in seeing, like, and that's like absent us. Like we're not doing that. It's just like creating sort of the soil for it and creating like just a place for those connections to be made and them happening on their own. And so that's been incredible. And then I think an opportunity, we're thinking a lot about products, and we're thinking a lot about like how we attract founders into our community and how we leverage the ideas in our community and like the creative people and the builders to build and incubate products alongside us in Boys Club. And so we have a incubator that we're sort of, again, in the spirit of experimentation, we have one startup that's going through an incubator right now, sort of like leveraging like a product designer here or like a digital marketing expert here or like some business person here from the community to like help nurture that project along. And I think we're really interested in figuring out like, does this scale for the other builders in our community? So that's something that like is very much a bud, but I think is a really interesting proposition in a DAO.
That's super exciting. I don't know how you guys have the time to do all of these cool projects because
there's 24 hours in a day,
job. There are, but gosh.
Yeah, it's intense. It's intense.
Yeah. Kudos to you. I'm super impressed. Also, I lied. I have one more question. So last question for you is, given that like you have this focus on helping onboard women to Web3 and reducing this gender disparity in Web3, what would you say is the number one highest impact thing that people who are currently in Web3 can do differently or do better to make this Web3 a more inclusive place for women and non-binary people to want to come into?
Oh, that's a great question.
I mean, I would just say sponsor Her House, sponsor Boys Club, give money to Shifa. Like there's so many groups that are like so much like really on the front lines of this work. And like we're the ones who see like we have the experience, we know the opportunities, like we have the communities. So look at one of these grassroots organizations and like donate some time or resources or give them some attention. And there's so many incredible ones.
Yeah, I just to piggyback off that, like have the same perspective that I think Boys Club and many other communities have about value adding versus value extraction. I think we have some inbound that comes to us with like, hey, we'd love to hop on a call and like talk about what you guys are doing, which we're happy to do, but they're really not thinking about what they can give to our community. They're thinking about what they can take from it. And we have a real sensitivity to that, not because of Deana and I in our time, but because we're really protective over what we've built here and the women that have come to, the women and non-binary people and all sorts of people who are a part of our community. And we know how special and how, frankly, like fragile that is. And so I think if you are sort of thinking about having a more diverse and inclusive workplace or DAO or protocol or whatever it is, and you're looking at our communities as an example of how to do it well, if you want to work with any of them, really be thinking about how you're adding value and not just coming in and getting what you need out of it. And then the other thing is like, I would just listen. Like if you're a dude, if you're an entrepreneur, you're a founder and you're a dude and you do not get why this is not an inclusive space, like listen to our podcast. Like take some time to hear about the experience of people that aren't like you in this space and learn from that. So those would be sort of my two recommendations.
Nice.
Yeah, that second point. I mean, both of those, I love both of those points so much. But that second point is like that thought like goes into my head probably like on a daily basis as I'm talking to people in this space. And I really wish that people would just like stay in their own lane, like say the stuff that they know, and then just like let other people say the stuff that they don't know.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, so real quick, last thing, we end every podcast episode with a quick little game. It's called This or That. So I'm going to give you 2 words, A or B, and you just tell me which one you prefer. You don't have to explain yourself. It's super fast, lightning round. Great. So I have 10 pairs of words for you guys, and maybe we'll just take turns, or like you'll both answer every one, but maybe like Natasha, you can start, and then Deana.
Great.
So the first one, Bitcoin or Ethereum?
Ethereum.
Okay. Crypto or Web3?
Deana, you go.
Oh, okay, great. Web3.
Okay. DAOs or NFTs?
DAOs, baby.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know. You had like...
That's true. That's
true.
That people love. Okay, next one. Bear market or bull market?
I mean... Is the glass half full or is it half empty? I'm not sure. We're here now. I'm going to say bear market just because I don't want to be depressed.
Just bull. Nice. So much easier.
No, I'm just here for a good time, not a long
time. Okay, building or investing?
Building.
Building.
Culture or tech? This is kind of a dumb one.
Oh,
after what we
culture.
just talked about,
Culture.
yeah. Books or podcasts?
I mean, podcast. We're here.
It's a podcast.
Podcast
I
moment.
would love to be a
pressure.
books.
You don't have to say podcast just because you're on a podcast.
Honestly, you can listen to a podcast and do something else, which is sort of the name of the game for me right now. So
agree.
Yeah,
100% agree.
Yeah, same. Multitasking. I'm also like not intellectual enough for nonfiction. So we're in a podcast moment.
Okay, awesome. Next one, Twitter or TikTok?
Oh, you go first.
I have so much fun on TikTok. I mean, TikTok is more joyous. Twitter is more work.
Yeah, you guys are so good at TikTok too. Like,
thank you.
Don't even have a TikTok and it terrifies me, but you guys are so good at TikTok. So I would have been surprised.
Yeah, shout out to the TikTok ladies on the Boys Club team.
Okay, 2 more. Past or future?
Future.
Okay, and the last one, Earth or space?
Earth. I'm an Earth person.
We're here. We're here now.
Nice. Okay, cool. Congrats. You've completed the game. Thank you both so much. Before you go, can you just tell people where they can find you if they want to follow you, each of you personally, and then also where people can go to learn more about Boys Club, or where people, like, how can people join? Which, by the way, I sent in an application and I don't think I ever heard back.
Oh, we'll push you through.
Sorry, we're really backlogged very, very, very in a significant way. So if anyone's listening, mention this podcast and we'll prioritize your application. Yeah. And you apply on boysclub.vip. We made that URL domain name decision very quickly, and now are sort of regretting it. But we're stuck with it now. So yeah, boysclub.vip. It will say join the chat. You can submit your application there. Mention Deana in this podcast. We'll push you through. Boys Club Crypto on Twitter. Really encourage you to sign up for the newsletter, which is also on our website. It's a good time. And then
follow us on Instagram. It's fully unhinged.
Totally crazy. Just prepare your heart for insanity.
Yeah. And listen to our podcast.
Yeah,
Boys
those
Club.
are the big things.
Yeah.
Just Boys Club, not the Boys Club podcast. What are your personal handles if people want to follow you personally?
We're very boring. I'm me, Deana, on Twitter. Not that great, but
I'm at Natasha G. Hoskins, and it's sparse, and sometimes Dina's like, you should delete that. So thank you so much, Deana. This is so fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, taking the time on this Friday. Hope you have a great weekend. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in, and we'll be back again soon with another episode of Rehash.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. Our guests from this episode, Deana and Natasha, were nominated by Triumph and voted onto the podcast by Caitlin, Ellie Dots, Tyler Internet, and Triumph. Some of the questions you heard were submitted by Triumph. Rehash is hosted by Diana Chen, produced and edited by Ellie Dots and Tyler Internet, and as always, supported by Rehash DAO. To stay up to date on all things Rehash, you can follow us on Twitter at RehashWeb3 and join our Discord to get involved.